the question all of us are asking, which is the same question they're asking in Australia and South Africa and Latin America and everywhere else, is what does a post-COVID church look like? What are you thinking about? I'm sure you've been round the houses 3 or 4 times with different ideas and plans and things. So we've chatted amongst ourselves about the kind of things we're thinking about, but we're fascinated to know what you're thinking about. And we want to pick your brains on those kind of things. So what about Gav? What about if you start a Woodstock City? I know Woodstock is one of the campuses of North Point. For those of you who don't know, Gavin's the lead pastor there. What are you guys thinking about when you're about regathering in the digital and the mix of the two?
Yeah. Thanks for having us on the call too. We love you guys. It's great to connect and talk strategy, even with a little bit of Jesus behind it. So, the thing about post-COVID that I really, to start, Duncan, to answer that question, I feel like I want to back up a little bit and think about what has COVID taught us, because it's impossible. I mean, it's impossible as it is to presume upon the future anyway. I mean, COVID has taught us that, right? Last January, we had all sorts of plans and strategies and goals for 2020. And then in a moment, all of those things completely changed. And our entire strategy had to completely change. So I'm a little nervous to try to presuppose what post-COVID church will look like, because I think we're going to have to design it as we, it's almost like you build the plane as you fly it. We're going to have to get in it and begin figuring out where people are and begin kind of holding all of the plans and strategies very kind of open-handedly. But, crisis always reveals what's hidden, right? Like when we're not in crisis, things can feel stable, even if there's problems behind the curtain, but the crisis kind of pulls the curtain back. And I think for us at Woodstock City, what COVID did was revealed some gaps or revealed some issues that I'm grateful were revealed, because in the post-COVID version of church, I want to close the gap on some of those problems. So I feel like, can I just go through a couple of those things? I think,
please do.
I think COVID has reminded us, Woodstock City, has reminded us of how incredibly important connection and community and relationships are. It can be easy to run a church focused on production, music, preaching, content, transitions, all of these things, and forget that the thing that matters the most is Jesus and people, not all the things around that. And so I think COVID has reminded me that has to be the priority. Everything else is secondary. COVID also, I think, highlighted how immature the faith of most people in our church is. I think if you held a gun to my head in January and asked me how spiritually mature people at Woodstock City were, I would have guessed kind of low, but not nearly as low as it appears it actually is. And COVID has highlighted that. I have met with more people who are highly involved. I mean, they tick all the check marks of engagement. They're giving, and they're not even just givers. I mean, we would consider them tithers. I mean, they're high percentage givers. They're involved in multiple places in our church, volunteering. They're leading community groups, not just in a group, right? And their spiritual maturity in this has been unfortunately lacking. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way, but just as conversations have happened and the things that has been revealed in their life, because Christ has revealed it in them. It made me feel really bad as a pastor, like I'd really failed at leading them to become more spiritually mature or become more self-feeders, less dependent, on me, or less dependent on Sunday. And then the last thing was a bunch, but one more thing I think COVID has taught me is that I think I maybe supposed that our engagement metrics were a really great benchmark for spiritual maturity. And I don't know that I can say this completely this way, but I feel like I might have accidentally allowed engagement metrics to become the goal, not Jesus. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
How many people were in group was more important than what was maybe happening in group. Or how many people were giving became more important than why they were giving and what God was doing in their heart through their generosity. And so, what happens, right? Great organizations measure what matters, But the problem is that those metrics can so easily become a proxy for what actually matters. Like the metric can become what matters.
Mm.
And I think at Woodstock City, those metrics, and part of this is my personality, this is a flaw in me, I think, but those metrics can become a proxy for the thing that actually matters. And so I feel like post-COVID, back to your question, Duncan, post-COVID, I think I want to figure out at Woodstock City how to refocus our staff and our volunteers on the things that matter the most. So in order, even though we're, here in the US, we were strategic, but Jesus is first. Relationships and connection is second. And spiritual disciplines has got to be elevated for us. I think about like the 3 vital relationships. We're all familiar with that, right?
Yeah.
I feel like we have done a relatively good job at Woodstock City on 2 of them. And I think we completely lost our focus on intimacy with God through spiritual disciplines, through some other things. I think we've got to figure out how to re-engage people there. So, at our church services, when we start getting back together, for us, we're planning on January the 31st to come back to the building, but in a socially distanced way with reservations and all that. So we can't fill the place up, and we don't want to. We feel like that's going to be unsafe for a while. But for us, January 31st, I want to redesign our service a little bit. I don't think our church service can be driven by content anymore. I feel like it has to be driven by a relational or a connection and an experience. Like in the past, I think I would have argued that everything we do in the church service is driven to minute 58. We have an hour-long service. Everything we do is going to be driving to minute 58, where we make the point of the sermon is the point of the day. But the problem is that, and this has been a problem for a long time. COVID, I think, just highlighted it or illuminated it. You can get content anywhere. You don't have to come to church to get content. In fact, no one is coming to church to get content. They're getting it wherever they want. So why would people even come back to a church? If content's the answer, they're not going to come. I think it has to be different now. And I think it has to be, in a way, I think it has to be back to some basics like connection and experience. So I think we're going to work really hard on, and I don't have all the answers on that yet, Duncan. I have some ideas, but we're going to experiment and, fail and hopefully fix it. But I think we got to figure out a way to make it a more experience-driven thing, not a content-driven thing. We have to figure out a better way to engage people in spiritual disciplines and not allow Sunday to be the only discipline. Because that was not even a discipline for people necessarily. Twice a month for us at max on average.
Gavin, can I just jump in quick on that? Because I think what you're saying, I think, has raised a ton of questions in people's minds. So I'm going to let them ask that question, but I don't want to rush away from this idea. It just demonstrates to me what a great leader you are, that I ask you the question, what does Woodstock City look like post-COVID? And you go, whoa, hang on. Before we can start talking about what the future looks like, we've got to stop and ask ourselves, what have we learnt from the crisis around? Because we can't redesign something unless we know where we've come from. So I just think we all need to, if you're like me, you're a future thinker, and most leaders are visionaries, and we want to jump straight to some new ideas, fresh thinking. But we need to do the hard work of saying, honestly, are our people spiritually weak? Have we dumbed down spiritual disciplines, and do we need to lift those higher? Let's not lose that opportunity. But what questions have you got out of that? Because I've got one for Lane in particular, but what questions have you guys got out of that for Gavin? Maybe you want to go a bit deeper. Rich?
Okay. Yeah,
Rich and then Chris.
That was so good what you just shared. Thank you so much for that. Just a question on what you were saying in as much as like it's going to be building the plane as you go along when you start back. Like you're talking about maybe making some changes rather than content to relationship and experience. When you start meeting back at the end of January, are you going to have those changes already made? So you're going to start with a new look service, or are you going to see who comes back first of all and, kind of start off as you used to be when you were meeting before COVID, and then look to make the changes after that? Just Chris, does that make sense?
It does. And Lane, please feel free to jump in. I don't want to dominate any of these things. for us at Woodstock City, I think we're going to make some of these changes day one, because again, I may not be right about this, but I feel like being gone for this long, there is no normal. So when we come back, however we come back is going to be whatever is normal now. So I feel like it's the perfect time to come back with some new ideas and new thinking and test it. I also know that the people who are going to come back are going to be our ultra insiders. So with that in mind, I mean, no unchurched person is probably showing up week one. You know, it's going to be our core insiders that are going to be comfortable, or at least more comfortable, coming back day one. So if we're going to screw something up and testing new things, I mean, you know, it's the perfect group to screw it up on.
Yeah.
And so if it doesn't work, we'll adjust it, obviously. But I don't think we're going to lose a lot by trying some new things and experimenting. I bet we're going to be 6 months. You know, for us, I think it'll be July, August before we're back to some semblance of whatever new norm will look like. I mean, that'll hopefully be on the other side of vaccines. I mean, we don't know, but we're guessing on the other side of summer, you know, for holiday for us. And so I've told our church over and over, I think, Lane, we've talked a lot about this internally. We have to think like church planners right now, not like we're just reopening where we were. I mean, I feel like we're a church plant with a lot of people compared to a normal church plant. But we've spent the last several months with our volunteers trying to re-engage them and build the core again. I think we're going to spend from now until January 31st doing that, mostly digitally. And then we're going to open up January 31st with almost, you know, pretty much insiders. And we'll experiment with new things and learn as we go. But it's almost like this 6 months of figuring some new things out with a pretty safe audience.
Yeah, that's great. Chris, did you have something?
Yeah, it's to do that thing about why people come to church, and it's not full content, because you can get content anywhere, which I think links in also into the spiritually immature, the maturity levels of most of the people in the church. Because actually a lot of the thing that we get pushback from a small bunch of people is about the content, and I'm not being fed and all those sort of things. Have you thought around, you know, because I agree with everything you've said on there, how do you speak into that or help those people who say they want the content, but actually they don't want the content? How do you help them with that and see all those? There is a question there somewhere. I know I haven't phrased it very well.
This sounds super, I don't know. It sounds like I'm going to talk really bad about people for a minute, but I feel like I look at a lot of our people like babies. And well, Paul did too, so maybe it's not me. And they want to walk, but they just don't know how. So I think the issue with spiritual disciplines for at least for Woodstock City people, I think the majority of them would like to be more spiritually mature. I think they just don't know how to do it. And they think it's complicated and they're unsure. One of my staff members, Chris Kim, he's our director of groups and all that. You know, Chris has been saying this for a while, and I really love the visual. He feels like we need to hold people's hands a lot more than we have been. And so that's what I want us to figure out how to do better. I want us to come alongside people and teach and through vision the importance of disciplines. Probably call it something better than disciplines, because that sounds terrible too. And then create tools to hold their hands to help them start taking those steps, so that as they take them, they realize they're not as scary as they thought, they can do it, but we need to help them along the way. And right now we haven't been helping them. We have, for the most part, been saying prayer is important, go do it. Reading your Bible is important, not the Old Testament, go do it. You know, I'm just kidding. You know, I mean, group is important, but I know way too many people who have been in small groups for years who are just as mean as they ever have been, right? There's no kindness, no goodness, no peace, none of the fruit of the Spirit, seemingly. Like, it hasn't changed because they sat in a group for a few years eating pie and drinking coffee. I feel like we've got to figure out a way to just infuse those disciplines of maturity in new and fresh ways, but make it really accessible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really helpful, Gavin. Leon, did you have a question?
Yeah, it's kind of connected a little bit, Gavin, to what you've been saying and to what Rich and Chris have raised. And I suppose for me, it's I mean, years ago, I suppose I was really impacted, as many of us were, by this whole notion of a church for the unchurched through North Point's influence. What I'm hearing and sensing right now is almost a massive pivot change around the focus on Christians and growing Christians. And I guess I was totally bought into the concept of deep and wide. I guess I'm asking now the question, is an attractional model of church actually ever going to deliver people who are deep and wide? Because what I'm hearing, so my question, I'm leaning onto a question is, where's the whole focus on the unchurched? Because if we're talking about a more experiential based, a Christian discipline based, a going deeper with relationship, that feels very inward, that feels very us. It doesn't feel very them. It doesn't feel very others. So I guess I'm asking a question really, you know, we're all here because we believe in church for the unchurched. Yeah, and I've got a deep, you know, wrestle in my own spirit and mind with where that is right now, if I'm honest.
That's a great question, Leon. Great question. Gav.
Lane, can I address it really quick for us, and then you talk about it overall? Hey, Leon, that is my tension.
Yeah.
I feel it so strongly. And here's the other issue that we haven't brought up yet. I don't know how this works across the world. In the UK, maybe it's different. I do know that here in my community, the millennial generation and the Gen Z generation think differently than mine, Gen X.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the way that we focus on reaching the unchurched millennial and unchurched Gen Zer is different than the unchurched Gen Xer. I think that the unchurched, maybe baby boomer and Gen Xer appreciated content and anonymity way more.
Yeah.
I think the most attractive thing to a millennial and a Gen Z person, at least from our research here, is authenticity, it feeling real, and them seeing something they don't have but want. So Leon, here's how I'm thinking about it. I don't think this is going to make us a church for insiders at all. I think it's actually going to help us become a church for the unchurched even more than we have been over the past few years.
Okay.
But I think what's going to happen is we're going to, in our services, for instance, I think we're going to allow a person to remain anonymous as long as they want to, which is a very safe thing.
Yeah.
I think we are going to encourage, invest, and invite more than we ever have. I think we're going to add a word. I think it's going to be invest, share, and invite, because there's a digital component now.
Yeah.
But when they show up, digitally or physically, I don't think we're going to force anything. We're still going to use secret comprehensible language, so we're not going to become a church for insiders. It's still going to be driven to the outsider, but how that looks with the new generation has to shift, right? Yeah. Not only that, COVID has shifted it. So for instance, I'm convinced, but I'll be the first one to admit I'm wrong if I am, and I might be, but I'm convinced that a unchurched person today, if they sit in a dark room and there's no connection and nothing experiential about it, you know, I don't know that that's attractive enough to come back to.
Yeah.
But how about this, Leon? What if you're an unchurched person, you sit in the back of the room and you're observing, but what you see are people who seem to be friends. They seem to really love each other. They might have differences of opinions or see some things differently, but they have put that aside for something bigger than that.
Yeah.
Like, I think, for instance, in a pure application way, I want to start our services in the welcome by, I don't know if we're going to call it this, and it may be a terrible idea, but I want to ask everybody, I'm calling it life updates. I want to basically start the service by welcoming everybody and going, hey, just for a couple of minutes, hey, raise your hand really quick, yell it out. Hey, what's something great that happened to you in the last week? We can celebrate with you. I think the unchurched person watching us celebrate each other, pray for each other, love each other well publicly, I think that is more attractive than incredible content.
Yeah.
And so I think what we're trying to do is figure out what's attractive to the unchurched person today, not become a church for insiders.
Yeah, it's good. Thank you.
Does that help you?
It does. I think it's a massive shift in our thinking and where we've arrived at, and then where it feels like it's going now. I think my concern is that we'll become a church for insiders again. That's my concern. In the response to, you know, the spiritual maturity. It's a little bit like when Willow Creek did the Reveal survey way back in the day, you know, and all of a sudden they realized that an attractional based model of church wasn't producing depth of spiritual maturity, you know, and I guess that's, yeah, I agree with all you've said. I just, it's the tension, I think.
So let me ask Lane that question then, because, you know, Lane, you were around from day one of North Point, and the whole thing has been, you know, and I've heard you say, you know, a million times that we need to marry ourselves to the mission and date the model. And like you said, because we all love dating a model. But that's Lane's words, not mine. But so what are you seeing, Lane? Because you've been around so long, are you seeing it as a big shift? What do you see? Because, you know, Gavin, you're Gavin's boss, and Gavin reports into you, but you're also the boss of all the multi-campuses, aren't you?
So everything I just said, Lane may tell me not to do. I don't know.
Well, I think what Gavin is expressing, and I've heard this from multiple guys in his position and from you know, different people on staff, is reflective more of the fact that in the last 25 years, when we first started North Point and began figuring out the new, you know, the model for creating a church unchurched people would love to attend, that needed to be figured out. I think there was some confidence, you know, and sometimes misplaced, but often confidence that we had figured out how to, you know, develop disciples, you know, just the church, not us, the church in general. And I'm probably the only person on this call old enough to remember plate spinners that, you know, they would spin plates on the poles and then they would run and spin another one and try to keep them all spinning. I think in some ways we took our eye off of that plate because there were so many plates to focus on that had never been figured out. And the church was such a barrier to outsiders coming in. We really focused there and we're growing there and assumed that old systems and old approaches, you know, would continue to produce, you know, new results. And I think what we have found is that, you know, that's not necessarily the case. Although we, you know, if you looked at our staffing, if you looked at our budgets, if you looked at that, we spend far more money and time focused on the kitchen, the small group end of our church than we do, you know, the front end. But I would say we've done far more innovation on the 4-year bit, you know, how do we become attractive and remain attractive to unchurched people? So I honestly don't think, Leon, it's a shift as much as it's a, you know, it could be a shift of focus internally that's like, this plate has started to wobble and it may be falling off the stick if we don't go in and figure out, you know, some new approaches there, just as we have across, you know, other things. So I don't think we will ever lose the distinctive of being, you know, a church that is designed for and focused on reaching unchurched people. It's really just, as Gavin said, you know, these types of things expose all the gaps and all the weaknesses. And this was just one that it was like, you know, we need to get over there and get some sharp people in the room figuring out how do we get that plate spinning again? Because, you know, it hasn't provided necessarily the results that you know we all want, but we've also made peace with the fact that we're only going to get people so far. I mean that there is a mindset with a lot of believers that, and it sounds like I'm saying it's negative, and it probably is, you know. So, but you know, they become very consumer oriented, and I want to grow, and we will never feed that, you know, machine or that appetite, because we think it's, you know, self-focused, not others focused, as Gavin was saying. And, you know, we will always err on the side of getting people fed enough to be healthy, to be able to serve and invest and be in the lives of other believers and outsiders. So, I think on this kind of call, Leon, it feels like a shift, a missional shift, but it really is, I think, and when I say insiders in this case, I mean staff and volunteer insider. It's the internal workings people that are looking at that part of the machinery and going, we need to do some work over there. And but Gavin, would you say that's?
Yeah, 100%. And Leon, when I thought about your question more, and Lane, as I listened to your answer, I think the plate spinning is a beautiful example. And the only thing I would add to it is that I think there's just one plate that's spinning that is so ingrained in us, I don't think it'll ever fall off. Like everything I just described, I probably accidentally, and I didn't mean to create confusion in that, I probably accidentally skipped over the fact that creating a church for my unchurched neighbor is never going to go away in my heart. So that, every time I preach, do the welcome, we have music, no matter what we do, it's always with that person in mind. So creating a church that an unchurched person loves it just oozes out of us. So no matter, the one thing I think that we're positioned well to do is people like Andy and Lane have done such a good job of ensuring that vision is kind of, embedded in all of our hearts, that now we can focus on some other plates without worrying about losing that one. I think we're a long way away from having to worry about that. But Leon, I think it's important that we don't take our eyeball off of it too.
This is such a brilliant discussion. I sat listening to Andy speak at the Lead Pastor Conference last year, 2019, before any of this COVID nonsense arrived. And which you guys would know, he talked a lot there about the fact that you felt at North Point you'd been baristas serving up hot ministry for years and years. People just came. You didn't have to do any advertising. People just walked in through the doors, thousands of them. But now you're realizing that those numbers were flatlining and if not dropping in some places. And so you had to move, Andy was saying you're having to move your mindset from being baristas that serve up hot ministry to being missionaries. And it's that even pre-COVID thinking that I think has been part of North Point's overall, re-engineering and reimagining, really. Jim, you had your hand up earlier on. Did you have a question? And then Steve's got a question.
Yeah, thanks. It's interesting what you're saying there. I think Kerry Newhoff wrote something a couple of years ago, or maybe last year, about how people are looking to experience the transcendence of God in services. And actually those services and those churches that are doing that in America are certainly the growing ones. So Leon, I think you're ahead of us, Leon, when I think of what you guys do as well. But that's not my question. The question's around the immaturity that you experience people. I suppose it's a question of maybe you can expand on that a little bit, Gavin, but also, is it also that actually our mission isn't quite gone beyond our staff and our teams to our people and
That's
our
great.
insiders, and actually is the mission really there? Was kind of my question. And then I've got two questions. The second one was around the metrics. If engagement isn't the metric, then have you worked out what is the metric, or what are we going to look at?
Yeah,
go ahead. Well, I was just going to say, I think Gavin, the point he made as he was talking about that is it's not just how many people are in group, but what's happening in group. That doesn't mean counting the number of people in group is still a strong indicator of is the strategy working. So I think we all feel like the four things that we measure are still, I don't think anyone has found a new thing to measure to decide if people are at least doing what we've asked them to do. The question is what we've asked them to do, having the effect that we want it, to have. And on everything, we're having conversations about inviting and we, and that's very hard to measure, but if it's happening or not, because if there's no new people showing up, it's probably not happening very well. But we also know we've not really done a great job of training people to invite and that whole, side of it. So again, I think that reflects back to what Duncan was talking about, Andy saying, you know, we used to talk about invest and invite, and people did invite, but also there was just a momentum that the barista model came out of, where we opened the door and people flooded in. Now we're realizing, especially in communities where we've been for more than, you know, 15 years, 20 years, you know, everybody that's just going to walk in has walked in, you know, and so, you know, but you know, the model still works. I mean, Gavin opened Woodstock City and, you know, in Woodstock, and, you know, people walked in, they flooded in. So, you know, there's a lot of it has to do with the age. You know, we have 25-year-old campus, and we have a 8-9-month-old campus, you know, where people are still kind of flooding in. So we're figuring out a lot of things at different, you know, seasons of life. So, you know, we've got geriatric problems and we've got newborn problems.
Yep.
Just say one of the things that I think, you know, I feel like Duncan, you were alluding to, which is important. I think this is where Gavin started too, is I don't know that COVID, the only thing COVID has done is compressed, you know, 5 to 10 years of change into a year.
Yep.
But it, you know, and it's also created enough separation between what was and what, you know, will be, that we can take bigger steps than, or quicker steps. But what needed to change last January is the same thing that needed to change this January.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it, you know, it really is a matter of taking advantage of the emergency and the opportunity, you know, and not letting it go to waste. So I you know, when I saw your question, what does COVID need to look like? You know, the main thing that I wrote down is anything you wished you could have killed last January.
Yep.
Just could not find a way to do it. You got the best excuse that, you know, some, you know, laboratory in China could ever create. So
yeah, that's great. Steve, you had a question.
Yeah, I think whenever we start talking about post-COVID, we automatically go to a Sunday and of what are we going to do on Sundays. And if there's one kind of thing that has developed throughout this time, is that church goes way beyond a Sunday, and especially on the digital side of things. And so, do you think that there are some things, though, which would still be kept to midweek? And so you talk about the spiritual disciplines. Do you see that as being a big Sunday thing? Or do you see that as actually that's for whatever we do midweek, whether that's groups or other things, that's where we need to be putting energy? Or do you still see the Sunday as being the launch point for anything that you would want to bring emphasis to?
Yeah, you know, most of our groups obviously don't meet on Sunday. I mean, we're midweek and things like that. I think that our digital platforms are what's going to give us the best opportunity to untether from Sunday. Like, I don't think we can ask people to gather more. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think we'll be gathering less. I think that's what's going to happen. I think COVID has forced that. I mean, to the point where we may even talk through taking some Sundays off during the year, or maybe even a month off or two or something during the year, and just doing all digital, you know, for a month or something. I don't know. I mean, so I think gathering more won't be the thing. I do think, though, leveraging our digital platforms to help people stay connected to spiritual disciplines, or just using our digital platforms as dissemination tools for that. You know, we used to rely on Sunday to share a, baptism testimony, right? We don't have to do that. I mean, we can share stories all week long if we want to. So I think the first person I heard say it that way, Jeff Henderson, talked about that before he bailed on us all, loser. And I said, he's one of my best friends. I can say that, I guess. He talked about how untethering from Sunday is going to become really important. And I think that's what we're trying to figure out. You know, can we create, and we've betaed some of this before when we did our series 90, where we had, people texted in and received twice a week, kind of mini devotionals. I think things like that, we're going to have to do more of. And that will be, it won't happen on Sunday, but Steve, what I'm really hoping we can do, we're talking through this right now here locally, is I would love for us to be able to spend Thursday digitally previewing and getting people thinking about an idea, spend Sunday really digging into the idea, and spend the following Tuesday going deeper into that idea. And then repeat it on Thursday again. So we're kind of building traction for where we're heading on Sunday, and then using the days following Sunday to take it deeper and then start the cycle over again. So we can leverage the non-Sunday moments. However, I do think Sunday needs to still remain the focus, or a primary focus, because I think that we will never replace the relationships, the corporate worship, all of those things that happen on Sunday. Again, COVID has taught us that. I mean, we can't, Zoom doesn't replace being together in the room. It never will fully. It never will. So I feel like we've got to figure out a way to leverage the screen to drive people to real community and real presence, and then rinse, wash, repeat.
Gavin, I remember you saying something similar to this when on a call we were on previously, and it really stuck in my mind. And I love this idea of taking periods off in the year from actually physically gathering, but putting as much energy into the digital. So, we're having the summer off because most people go away, and the summer's always a crazy time around church. But it's not that we're having it off from doing church. We're going to put as much energy as we put into the room, we're going to put on digital. In fact, maybe even more. And so if you are around, there are a ton of very creative, it gives us the chance to do things, rather than Andy standing or Gavin standing next to a flat screen plasma TV, we'll have him on a boat in a lake talking about Jesus, calming the storm. We can do some things that normally we wouldn't be able to do. So you can really look forward to the summer, or really look forward to, another month in the year. So the 2 months in the year, you only actually physically gather for 10, and 2 months of the year, it is a digital thing. So it changes so it gives you another, if you have a month away, it gives you another bit of energy to come back to. It gives you another kickstart, another momentum moment, doesn't it? Thrown into the schedule. I love that idea. Any other questions before we?
Duncan, really quick on that. Lane, we've talked about this before, right? Like, the two words, exclusive and scarce, are so important. And if something isn't exclusive and if it's not scarce, it feels very easy to miss. I feel like that's how my church has felt that way. If I miss Sunday, no big deal. I can just come next week, because next week there will be a welcome, 2.5-ish songs, a vision, and a sermon. There's nothing exclusive or scarce about it. So I think we've got to figure out a way to elevate those two words and elevate the experience, so it feels like if you miss it, you missed something.
Yeah, exactly.
And not doing it as frequently makes it more scarce.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Chris?
I was just going to ask Gavin if he's had any thoughts already about how to kind of grow that experiential element.
Lane, were you going to refute what I just said about scarce and exclusive?
No.
I thought you were about to make a comment.
No, I was going to.
Your job's safe, Gavin. Don't worry.
No, answer Chris. I was just going to make a point about them. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm Chris. I mentioned a couple of things. Like this life update thing, having conversation in the service. I think I don't know that we'll do more music. But we might do a little bit more music on the front and the back. We may not do more on the front, because I think 10-ish to 12 minutes of standing is plenty of at once, but we may try to do more music on the back. I mean, again, I don't get to dictate all of these things. So this is just, I think that shorter sermons are going to be helpful for us. I think that, I would like to rethink the way we do sermons. I think that it would be better if we could figure out a way to make them more conversational than, like, more dialogue than monologue. That's easy for me to say, though, because I don't have to worry about your move and a national audience and all that. So just at Woodstock City, no one even cares about it but me and our church. So I have more leeway to experiment than Andy does. But like Duncan, like you just said, I'm not, again, don't hold me to any of this, but I'm not sure that standing beside the plasma is the best thing to do anymore. I wonder if there's a way to communicate content differently post-COVID that feels more like an experience than it does like listening to a monologue, So I think I think we're trying to figure out all that right now. And we had volunteers in the last 3 weeks because we did live services. Well, 3 weeks in November, the first 3 weeks, and so Chris, I specifically talked to the audience 2 or 3 times during the service and got feedback and had conversation about stuff just to see how it would work and how we felt about it, So I think trying to do things like that will be helpful potentially. And again, the good thing is if you're unchurched, you can sit in the back or in the front. You don't have to raise your hand. You don't have to even participate, but you get to watch people participate. And then you get to watch how they're treated and how connected they feel and how it, I think that will be something that will be interesting to experiment with. But these are experiments. So if we get back together, Duncan, in 6 months, I may just go, hey, that all, none of it worked. But
I mean, to give Andy his due, he is some of those over the last 6 months of lockdown and COVID and stuff. He's done a few where he's pushed the plasma to one side and put a couch on the stage and talked to people.
Exactly.
And they've been incredibly potent. They've been very memorable.
And let's not forget, the reason we have the plasma is because one day Andy discovered we should rethink the way we do sermons.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so we decided to go that way. I just wonder if COVID has introduced another, to Lane's point, it's compressed 5 to 10 years of change into now. So do we need to rethink that too? I don't know, but I think it's worth thinking about.
Gavin, can I just, sorry, Derek, did you have a question?
Yeah. I was just thinking around the experiencing God, and you talked about music, whether you do more music and stuff. Do you ever look at any other ways of experiencing God, drawn in from other traditions, silence, meditation, that sort of stuff, where you actually do it for a couple of minutes, which then trains people on how to do that during the week? Because I think that's really appealing to unchurched people, to be taught how to do kind of spiritual stuff that connects with God.
Lane, what do you think?
Americans don't like silence, so that's tough. I mean,
to be fair, there's not normally silence when Americans are in the room either. So,
right, and I'm only partially being facetious. Derek, I agree. There are some things that we need to reintroduce. I think prayer is one of the most effective and easiest. As far as, hey, if you would like someone to pray for you, and it's almost embarrassing to say, so you guys don't do that. Well, it's there, but we don't do it as a part of our practice, and therefore it becomes less. Yeah, as you said, we don't teach them by what we're modeling, how to do that themselves. So I think there are a lot of those things that we can do, can introduce, we can give a taste of on Sunday, and then lean into in the small group settings and that that kind of thing. But what I was going to say earlier, is as much as we love sharing what we're doing with you guys, and hopefully there's some things you can pick up and learn from. I really feel like you and a lot of our partners are in a better position to figure this out, primarily because in some ways, and this sounds arrogant to say, but we run the best Blockbuster, store that there is in the country as it relates to this model. I mean, we do this, we've honed this thing down to a fine razor's edge, which means we will be the last people to abandon it, because it does keep working, and it does, so it's like when the old illustration of the Swiss were the last people to get away from the spring wound, watches, because they developed the best watches in the world, and they lost 99% of the market because they didn't shift. So I think we will get there. But I do think that, you have the opportunity to try some things and to do some things. And I've had the same conversation with a lot of our partners here stateside, so to Gavin's point, there is no answer right now. There are just opportunities to try whatever we think, might work. So we really anxiously look forward to leaning into what you guys learn and what our other partners learn, as much as, we want to be an asset. So
that's so helpful, Lane. I was Tracy and then Andy. I was this blockbuster idea. There was one church I was following, and it fascinated me that they decided during lockdown they didn't want to be Blockbuster, they wanted to be Netflix. So they realized that church was one of the very few institutions where I turn up and I've no idea what the content's going to be. You decide, you the preacher, you decide what you're going to download to me. Everywhere else I go, I make the choice. So when I go on Netflix, I don't want to watch a comedy, I want to watch a documentary, or I don't want to watch a documentary, I want to watch a drama or a thriller. I make the choice. And so they wanted their church to be more like that. So they produced a whole bunch of different content on the site, and their website looks like Netflix. You flick through, a talk on marriage, a talk on parenting, a talk on finances, a talk on spiritual development, a talk on relationships. And that's what I want. I'm not, I'm single. I'm not even married. I don't want to come to church for a 3-week teaching series on being a better parent. It's like, So
we just saw that in a parenting series Andy did. Our viewer numbers just went straight down. And it was that, it illustrated that very thing that, whereas the room, nobody gets up and leaves the room, because that would just, be offensive. Plus their kids are in a program, so they can't, but they check out. I mean, they're on their phone or they're doing something else. So this was just a visual, representation of the way people mentally check out. They just stopped watching, and numbers dropped. I won't say they dropped quite in half, but almost in half.
Wow.
Because we were talking to parents, especially of teenagers and under, so yeah.
If Gavin and Lane are okay, another maybe 10, 15 minutes, if that works for you guys, that would be great. So Tracy and then Andy, and then I've got one just kind of final question to ask before we let these guys go. Trace.
Thanks. I don't often have much to bring to the table. We're a much smaller church. We're only about 80 people on a Sunday. But one of the things we've been doing for a couple of years, and it was actually because of some people wanting to do long intercession prayers, and I had to stop it, is that we actually break into groups for prayer. I just say, there's no point me praying from the front. I can pray for you, but wouldn't it be better if everybody starts praying? So we have done it now for about 3 years. We break into small groups, so it doesn't matter how many people are there, and people share a little bit what's going on in their life, and then they all pray in groups, and we do that for about 5-10 minutes and then come back. And we got a lot of kickback about that at the beginning, because people had never, even though they've been coming to church for 30 years, had never prayed out loud, and they'd never prayed for other people. And I would say that it wasn't designed like that. I was trying to stop something else from happening, but it really helped a lot with people praying. And I think it took about 6, 9, maybe even 12 months for people to come back and say, do you know what, I hated it, and I was really angry with you that you did it, but my prayer life and being able to pray for people and offer prayer has really intensified over this last year. So I say that just to share that if that's helpful to anybody else, but also to encourage that sometimes when we do try things, they take a long time to get embedded and people do kick back. But for us, that was definitely an area that people spiritually grew through doing that.
As Lane said, there's never been a better time to experiment than now with those kind of things. Yeah. Thank you, Tracy. Andy.
Yeah, thanks for these thoughts, guys. Just as always, just really insightful. And I think what I've picked up from what how the conversation has gone is there's that desire for intimacy, and I think it comes into that authenticity side of stuff, doesn't it? Genuine experience of not just kind of, obviously you guys talk a lot about, circles are better than rows, and it's almost trying to bring that sense into a Sunday service, and obviously Gavin, you said about kind of, life updates and all that kind of stuff. And I think what we've been talking about really, really early days is just really changing our emphasis in terms of our small groups, and really developing and equipping our small group leaders to almost become pastors of churches of 15, 20 people, including kids of those families. That's a big shift, But I think that's where that intimacy is found, isn't it? I mean, obviously you guys, you know, on your Sundays, you're talking thousands of people in an auditorium, which obviously makes live update moments of people standing up, potentially, you know, awkward and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But we're like church of 200, 250, and we would struggle to facilitate that, which brings it back to this small group setting. And for us, COVID has really, you know, revealed and exposed the importance of those small groups. And I just wonder whether or not that's where, you know, that those spiritual disciplines, that kind of putting your hand in someone else's hand and say, hey, walk with me as you know, as I lead you in my spiritual disciplines, maybe that'll rub off on you. Is that the setting that you guys feel would be more attuned to hitting those things that you're looking to do? And the question on the back of that is, how do you navigate the church through what would appear quite a big shift in focus from Sundays to small groups?
So, Andy, we made some changes in our small group structure to facilitate some of the things you just talked about. We, you know, we originally just had long-term community group. We experimented, but we didn't get to do it long enough before COVID to really have good data. But we launched something called growth groups. So then, and we kept community groups. And so we basically launched them the same week, but we said, hey, if you want to meet some people, talk about the sermon, you know, pray together, you know, whatever, community group is perfect for you. You know, think 70% community, 30% spiritual growth. But if you're ready to kind of take this a little more seriously, go a little deeper, we have this other thing called growth group. And it's, and you're going to flip it. It's 30% community, but 70% focused on growth. And we were surprised at the number of people who selected growth group when we first launched it. And again, we only got to go through 2 rounds of it, but it was very successful initially. So I think that is going to continue to be part of our answer. This past August, we launched community groups. Because of COVID, we couldn't do all of it, but we just did a semester-long one, 6-month group. So we're beginning to even consider, should community groups be 6 months long that lead to a growth group that's a year and a half long? You know? Yeah. So yeah, I think, so you know what, it feels like the world used to be a little simpler, you know? And you could have 2 or 3 steps and that was good for us as a church. Now I feel like we need lots of incremental steps along the way. Yeah. And that's what we're trying to create in that.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
So you kind of understand our context just a little bit. A lot of the things Gavin's been talking about are things we're trying at Woodstock City, or Gavin's team is trying at Woodstock City.
Yes.
And we, especially since COVID started, but really part of our DNA as well, is to allow experimentation at the campus level. And then that informs what we do at the corporate level. So a lot of these things are experiments and we're learning from them. And as Gavin said, you know, that the response to the growth groups was great, but we didn't quite have enough time to, you know, prove the concept. Dr. Fauci would not have approved it for distribution.
Indoctrination.
Yeah, but you know, we are in that we're in that season of, so there are other campuses, you know, if another one of the lead pastors was here, they'd be talking about, you know, some of those same things, but 3 or 4 other ideas.
Yep.
Well, I think the distinctive that we're working on is how do we do something in the room that isn't just as effective over, you know, a screen in front of you? Because if it can be just as effective this way, people will, you know, a large number of people will consume it this way. So it is that, wow, what is worth showing up for? And in my mind, the primary driver for that is we want to make sure that parents have something that's worth showing up for them so that they'll bring their kids, because the faith of the next generation, you know, is what hangs in the balance. Yeah. You know, the adults are important too. We don't discount that, but they can get a lot of what they need, you know, in other ways, but no one has quite figured out how to do children and student ministry, you know, without being face-to-face. So we just want to make sure we don't give parents an excuse not to show up.
Yeah.
And there, Lane, you've landed on the $64,000 question. You know, how on earth in this new world, how do we effectively work with families? It feels like for many of the faces I'm looking at on the screen there, we've lost their families. We don't know where they're at. You know, it was great when we had the kids running around in the building and the teenagers making a noise in the, you know, in the attic upstairs or something. But, you know, we just don't know where they're at. It's hard to get teenagers on calls. It's hard to get a 6-year-old on Zoom, you know, and what does that look like coming back? And I know for all of us, that's maybe this isn't a call to talk about it, but that is going forward, that is a big issue for us. Are you thinking, just quickly, Gavin, are you thinking around that with Woodstock?
Yeah, well, when we first entered into the COVID season, we were hopeful that we would come back soon enough that it would create demand, right? People would miss it. We've been gone so long, I don't even think people remember what it was like to go to church on a regular basis. So, and unfortunately for us here in my community, most other things have come back and become available. School is available in person, Little League sports, all of that's happening. So parents not only are out of the rhythm of coming to this church, they're in new rhythms that work against them coming to this church, even more than they were a year ago. Yeah. So we're gonna have to work very hard to reintroduce the need for parents engaging their children and students in faith instead of all the other things they could be doing, including nothing. It's going to be so we talked about being a church plant, thinking that way. That's part of that thinking. Like, we're not a barista. We're so far away from being a barista now. We're going to have to think differently. So we may have to go back to some old tactics, like more attractional based events to get people back. Doing things like, we've experimented with some of this already around Halloween. We had massive outdoor trick-or-treat thing for transit for middle school students, but we had 500 middle school kids come to it.
Wow.
So I think we can't just assume we'll open up Sunday and all the kids and students are going to come back. We're going to have to re-engage them by creating something worth coming back to that might lead them to finding a rhythm again.
And we wanted to cover all the pagan rituals that Christmas didn't cover, Chris.
We did.
But one of the things that we've done that is different than other churches similar to us in the US is that we've started back in the summer with student gatherings. So, and those have continued in January and February, they'll move into the buildings. So we've, because there's not enough room to do everything that we've done before, adults, children, and students. And so we've prioritized, students first and giving them the chance to gather. So if you go to one of our campuses at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, you'll find, maybe it's all middle school, and they're spread out all over the building so that they can be socially distant. But, we just focused on that. And, for the very reason that we know, was what Gavin was saying, is that things begin to compete with that, and it just becomes easy to get out of that. So as opposed to prioritizing adults and then figuring out what are we going to do with their students and children, we've figured out, we have online for the adults. So, we'll have them just come up, drop off their kids. They get, an hour and a half to go and have a cup of coffee or do whatever, and then come back and pick them up. So, that's not a long-term solution because eventually we got to, all get back in there together. But
I love that. Well, that's a fantastic question for all of us to ask. What would it look like in our churches genuinely? What would it look like if we were to say we are prioritizing our kids and prioritizing our teenagers? They were priority over adults. What would that look like? So people go, wow, yes, they are first in line. That would be very interesting. I've got, unless anyone's got a burning question for Lane or for Gavin, I have one final question that we asked previously, and then it will be, I think, time to go. But one of the things that we talked about a lot, guys, is our staff and particularly our volunteers have felt very disengaged these past 9 months. Especially our volunteers. There is no guest services you know, so our guest services team feel useless and redundant. And much of our discipleship, going back to spiritual disciplines, happened in those contexts as well. So how do you now begin to re-engage staff who've been working from home? How do you re-engage volunteers who used to turn up every Sunday and feel excited about the church, and now it's just the techie guys that turn up, the guy who can operate the camera and the sound? Yeah, any ideas?
Oh, like, I mean, I don't have any volunteers. Everybody I have that I work with is paid, so I'll let Gavin handle that.
That's been a real tough thing. Our volunteers have felt demoralized during it. Yeah. That's what they have felt, which has given us an opportunity, and we're just beginning to do it on a larger scale. It's given us an opportunity to start helping our volunteers remember the reason they feel demoralized, I think, and the same with our staff, is losing consistently is very demoralizing. And it feels like we have just been suffering loss after loss after loss. I think what this season is reminding us, and we're trying now to start communicating this to our volunteers in a very specific way, is that we have to remember that we aren't responsible for the results of this. We're responsible for the effort of this. And God is responsible for the results of this. So we're going to try. We're going to come back. We've been using the vision of, this pandemic has everybody in the community has probably more felt need now than they've ever had. And they have a more of a felt need for God than they might have ever had, which means we have an opportunity like we've never had. So as volunteers, we are about to potentially experience the greatest opportunity to inspire people to follow Jesus than we've ever had. And so I wonder what God is preparing to do through you as a volunteer that might not have happened if it weren't for this pandemic. So while it has really stunk, at the same time, it has created incredible opportunity. And God does his best work in the middle of brokenness. And so maybe God's about to do his best work through us. So I think there's some great vision on that side. I also think, though, it's been a wonderful reminder, especially for our staff, that our identity doesn't lie in graphs going up and to the right. Our identity, sits in something way bigger and way greater than that. I mean, I just taught our staff about this. We had a staff retreat, and I was walking our staff through a passage in Ezekiel, I think it's 17. Anyway, it's the Valley of Dry Bones. You all know the story. It's so amazing in that story how God doesn't do anything to the bones without going through Ezekiel. But he's responsible for the results, but God wants it to happen through Ezekiel. So God says, say to the bones, and Ezekiel says, and then the bones move. And so I feel like in that story, I feel like our staff and volunteers are one part Ezekiel and one part the bones. I feel like they feel dry and they feel lifeless. It's our job to help them begin to not feel that way through vision and through opportunity. I think it's also the vision and the opportunity is that God has positioned us to all be Ezekiel and to look at a community that probably feels dry like those bones, but God wants to breathe life into them, and he wants to do it through us and through his local church. And so we have the opportunity to be that. And probably now more than we ever have in my 10 years at Woodstock City, or 12 years, I guess now. And so as, Lane jokingly said earlier, but he's so right. Like, we should never let a good pandemic go to waste. And this has been a brutal, 11, 10 months. But I wonder if it's going to give way to a season of opportunity, the likes of which we might have never seen before.
Yeah. I
think that was more of a sermon. I'm sorry, Duncan, but I don't know if that answered the question.
No, I think what you've done is you've given us all our talk for the first Sunday back when we're back in church. I think you have. I mean, Ezekiel 17. I think because everyone's sitting there going, dry bones, are you kidding me? That's me. That's where I feel. And I need some life being blown back into me. So that's tremendously helpful. So just before we let these gentlemen head off, is there anything else that anybody wants to ask while we've got them here? Unmute yourself and make comments.
Can I say one thing very practical in 10 seconds?
Yes, of course.
With the volunteers, we're also beginning to hold Zoom calls with all of them, with me, not just with their staff people, so that I can begin to speak some of those things into their life too, and help them from my standpoint see the opportunity. So we're doing some very practical things to try to engage them in a bigger narrative and a bigger picture, which I think will be helpful as we begin to start meeting again.
That's a great idea. Zoom calls with the volunteers. That's a great idea. Leon?
Just what's one thing we can pray for you guys for? You have been so great investing into us this last few months. How can we pray for you guys in this season?
Well, I would just ask you to pray for this Friday. This Friday, we're having a one-day offsite with all our lead pastors, and it's gonna kind of be the day that we, you heard Gavin will bring a lot of these same learnings and same, things that they're figuring out into the room, but everybody else will too. And we'll start imagining what does a new model look like, and that enables us to shift the culture and especially on the digital side and all of that. So we would covet your prayers for Friday, just that we would we're going to be of multiple minds when we walk in the room, and I don't think we'll be of one mind when we leave the room. I'd like us to be of maybe two or three minds. If we can get down to that would be a win.
Right, we'll pray for that, guys. For sure.
Do you think there'll actually be a fight lane and fisticuffs? I'd love to see that. That would be great.
Yeah, not straight up fight, but yeah.
No. Okay. Maybe in the
shots taken, I'll tell you that. So
yeah. Maybe in the parking lot afterwards. Gavin, anything we can pray for you?
I'm excited about this meeting Friday because and Lane, I do think that we are all going to bring multiple ideas, but I think we're also open-handed, not knowing. We all know we're not right. We just know we have ideas. So I'm very excited to hear all the other ideas and to refine what we're all thinking together. I think it's going to be incredibly helpful. I think, like you guys, what we have been praying for, what I've been praying for, is for our staff and our insiders, our volunteers, things like that, to not allow the exhaustion of losing so much to kind of put a damper on the mission that God has put us in. I feel like it'd be Satan's greatest victory right now would be for us to be demoralized and to give up.
Yeah.
And so I think we've been praying against apathy, because when you lose over and over, it's just hard to keep fighting, showing up.
Yeah.
So I think we've been praying a lot that we just won't become apathetic and just mail it in and show up with a who cares, it doesn't matter anyway attitude.
Yeah.